I'm Corbett Wall with USDA Livestock and Grain Market News, here with your weekly feeder and stocker cattle market summary for the week ending June the 21st, where you had yearling feeder steers and heifers selling $2 to $4 higher, your calf market steady to $3 higher, and noticeably more active in places outside the southeast. We've just been seeing a really good test in the southeast, and when you get further north and further west from there, just not a really good test of calves. Still not really good runs of calves in those areas, but the trading was definitely more active and a definite higher undertone on the light receipts of calves that sold in those areas. Pretty good demand for all classes of feeder cattle, and it was kind of surprising in that we saw such strong demand for feeders right in the middle of the depressed fat cattle market that seems to lose a little bit of ground every week. But still, guys are going after these bigger yearling cattle. We'll probably see some cheaper cost of gains as we get into the later part of their feeding period, as we're still seeing good moisture in the major crop production areas, and the corn is looking pretty good in those places, even though they may not have got every acre of it planted that they want to. But your receipts of feeder cattle are rapidly declining, and we've seen some good runs of big yearlings, especially in the southern plains, up until the last week or so. But those are starting to tail off now. We've had a lot of big yearlings selling in southern Kansas and Oklahoma and places like that, but they're about to get to the end of those big cattle. They've been holding on to those cattle, waiting for a better market to come along, and it has come along in the last 2 or 3, 4 weeks, but they're about to run out of those cattle, and with 4th of July week coming up, we're going to see sharply lighter receipts coming up in the next several weeks. This week still had good demand down in the southern plains there. At Pratt, Kansas on Thursday, had 2 loads of big steers weighing 1,000 to 1,025 pounds. They bring 128 and 128 and a quarter. And then down in Dalhart at Cattlemen's Livestock Commission Company there in the Texas Panhandle, northern part of the Texas Panhandle, had a string of 191 head of steers, weighed 803. Now the condition was Mark Gant, meaning that those cattle had a weighing condition that was in the buyer's favor, which is going to help them, but they bring 140.75, weighing 803, all the way down into Texas Panhandle. But a lot of hay being put up around the country, especially where it's not so dry, east of the dry line that runs up through the central part of Kansas pretty much. But a lot of hay put up in eastern Kansas and Missouri and Arkansas, central and east Texas, going all the way up in the northern plains, and especially in the southeast and in those central midwestern parts. Once they get that first cutting of hay off, and it's a big cutting of hay, a lot more hay than we had last year, and so when they take that first cutting off, still had enough moisture where they got pretty nice pastures and that grass is tender. Those guys are coming into the market and starting to buy a few calves. Your packers have just been holding this fat cattle market down for quite a while now, and they've been making some pretty good money on these cattle, reportedly making from $50 to $100 a head on every one that they slaughter, while your feedlots just cannot stop the bleeding. Pretty much been losing money on every pen of cattle steadily since last fall. Still losing now, $150 to $200 a head, and just wonder how long they can keep taking that. Now, mind you, they still have risk management that helps them offset those losses, but just from a straight up point from what those cattle cost, what it costs to feed them, and then what they get for them, they're losing a lot of money on those cattle. Cattle on feed was a little bit depressing, and just, the analysts had really cranked that up where it was going to look really bullish for the feeder cattle market, but it just wasn't quite as good as what they thought, or it wasn't quite as bullish as what they thought. Your on feed totals as of June the 1st come out to be 96.9 compared to the average guess, which was 96.5. Your fed cattle marketings during the month of May come out at 96.6, which was not as good as the 97.9 that they had guessed. And your placements, which is always hard to figure, They did come in less than the same time a year ago at 98.3, but not as low as the 95.9 average that the analysts had guessed. Your fed cattle market, just hard to get. The guys dug in. There's not that many people selling cash fed cattle anymore, but the ones that are establishing the price for all the other ones. And they really dug their heels in this week as the packers had sharply lower bids all week long. And late Friday, you're starting to get some trade in the Southern Plains at 120, which is still steady to $1 lower. The Northern Plains had spotty trade around from 120, 121 and a half, and 192 to 194 dressed. But regional weighted averages this week in the north central states, an 8 to 900 pound steer cost you $133.39 compared to $136.21 last week and $147.50 a year ago. Down the south central parts, 7 to 800 pound steer cost you $137.24 compared to $135.71 last week and $149.65 a year ago. And down in the southeast, a 5 to 600 pound steer would cost you $141.33 this week compared to $137.73 last week and $158.72 a year ago. That wraps up your feeder market summary for this week. Check out our website for more market information at marketnews.usda.gov. And from the Regional Market News Office in St. Joe, Missouri, we'll talk to you next week.